Okay, so I think we'll maybe get started here. This is going to be action-packed, I guarantee. We have actually quite a few people presenting, so you have to bear with us as we kind of cycle through people. We thought about putting on a dance number, but there's not enough space here. Well, so yeah, the goal of this presentation, we did a little update on the Enhanced Consortia Support last year. The goal of this presentation will be to give you, ideally, a better sense of the functionality that's been implemented thus far, and maybe the possibilities that opens up, some of the exciting possibilities that opens up for FOLIO. And if you want to learn more, because there's going to be a lot of information here, but if you want to learn more, hopefully by the end here, you'll know who you should be talking to about the things that you'd like to learn. So we won't maybe introduce everyone who's going to present right at the beginning here, but as you come up, maybe say a little something about yourself. My name is Dennis Bridges, and I am a PO, FOLIO PO. I've been working on acquisitions and also coordinating some of the development of the Enhanced Consortia Support functionality we're going to be talking about today. And the general idea of what we're going to be going through here. Get slides going. There we go. So we'll talk a little bit about what Enhanced Consortial Support does today in the current release. And the current release we will be talking about being Cosnalia. So think of it in that context. What will it do tomorrow will be kind of ransoms and beyond. And why is this exciting for FOLIO? Again, I want to talk a little bit, once we've gone through all this detail, kind of look at the high level of what all this functionality means when you put it together as a kind of coherent set of features. And then we'll just touch a little bit on, where you can get more information, how you can get more involved if you'd like to get more involved, and so on and so forth. So what does Enhanced Consortial Support do for FOLIO? We're not going to talk so much about the technical side of things. There are a few other presentations that are happening later today and tomorrow that will dive a little deeper into the architecture and how this set of features really work. We're going to look at this from a functional perspective in the session today. And so I'll highlight some of the kind of core capabilities and I guess the general idea of Enhanced Consortial Support. The first thing that we would want to mention is that the user experience, the idea of this functionality, FOLIO has been a multi-tenant system for a long time. You can have multiple tenants running in a cluster, FOLIO. What Enhanced Consortial Support will do is allow those tenants to collaborate in simple terms. And one of the key components of this for a system with Enhanced Consortial Support enabled, so you're essentially taking a number of those tenants and relating them together. In a system like this, you have a central tenant, a thing that we will refer to through this presentation as the central tenant, which is important for a number of reasons. But one of those reasons is there is essentially one UI that you're logging into. So all the users, no matter what tenant is your primary tenant, no matter what tenant your user initially was created in, all of the users that log in will log into a single UI. So there's one place where you log in, and the system knows, based on your user ID and a few other things, where to actually authenticate you. So there's a single point of entry for a user, and then users within the system can have multiple affiliations. So your user can be affiliated with more than one tenant, and within that tenant, you can have a certain set of permissions. The way that the experience, the way this kind of plays out in the UI is a user with multiple affiliations has a little mechanism in the top right which you're seeing here in the little GIF. And in that menu, you can click switch affiliations. So if your user is affiliated with more than one tenant, you can set one of your tenants as the active affiliation. When you change your affiliation, as you'll see here, this particular user, for the first affiliation that's active, you can see all the apps that they have available to click on, right? So theoretically, this user in that particular tenant has permission to access all of those applications. But when the user changes its affiliation, they see a much more limited list. And this is just to illustrate this concept that your user can have a different set of permissions for those different affiliations. And the way it kind of plays out is it actually impacts what you're able to see, the apps you're able to use when that affiliation is active. Another key component of this system exists in the central tenant, and it's currently called Consortia Manager. This is an actual application that's only the UI for this application is only present in the central tenant. So in this system where you have multiple tenants, the central tenant is unique. The idea there is the central tenant is where some of the configuration, like the system configuration, is done. And you can actually adjust the settings of underlying tenants from this central tenant from the Consortia Manager. So that's part of what Consortia Manager is meant to do, is to help a user maintain this system rather than having to set your active affiliation to each of those tenants and go to settings and make changes. You can go to Consortia Manager and you can make changes across the entire system, among other things. Okay, so that brings us to inventory and authorities, the first area that we're going to talk about. So outside of core capabilities, there have been some interesting pieces of functionality added to these areas in the current version. And I think Ryan is going to say a few things.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Ryan Taylor, product owner for aspects of inventory as well as data import. So what we have today in ECS related on the inventory side is that if you are in a member tenant, not the central tenant, you will have access to local instances. So those are instances that are only available to that particular tenant, not available across the consortia. In the screenshot here, showing a display where on the left we have a filter we can go between shared or not. And when you drill into the instance, you can see at the top it says local instance, and there is now an option, depending on the permissions that the user has, to share a local instance. Go to the next slide. So here we're showing what a shared instance looks like. So from that last slide, if we had clicked that action to share the local instance, that instance would have been updated and turned into a shared instance. So what you can see here is that you can follow where it's held across a consortia. You'll see this little icon, the little share classic icon, indicating that a instance is now shared, which means it's available across the consortia. Any member tenant can view this instance when they're affiliated with whichever tenant they're a part of. You'll see at the top that the instance third pane, and now says shared instance rather than local. And you'll also now see consortial holdings as an additional drop down. So you can see where this is held across the consortia if it's shared. So I think that's it for this slide. And then I think we'll speak to similar aspects of authorities.
Hello, my name is Christine Schultz-Richard. I work on the team. We also have part of inventory like Brian's team, and we work on authorities as well. So Ryan already did a lot of the work for me, talking about the structure of shared and local records. But just like inventory, authority records can be created at the central tenant as shared, or created at a member tenant as local. Shared authority records can be used to control both shared and local bibliographic records, whereas local authority records can only be used to control local bibliographic headings. You can see, just like inventory, there is a shared facet which allows users to limit results to either shared or local authority records. Again, just like inventory, there is a shared icon to help differentiate between the two. I think we can go to the next slide, Dennis. Thank you. Authority files themselves can be managed centrally, as well as local files can be created for the member tenants to use. So in this example, as Dennis showed in the upper right-hand corner, we are in the context of the college tenant, a member tenant, and they have a very creatively named college local file. You can see in the authority source facet in a moment, it'll show up as such. And as well as within the authority source column to help differentiate between records of different sources. These records become discoverable and available for local authority control. I believe that's it for me. Magda.
Hello, everyone. My name is Magda Zacharska, and I am a product owner for OAPMH. There is no video for OAPMH, but a quick description of what we have done for ECS on the OAPMH side. We introduced a new type of harvest, which is considered a cross-tenant harvest that can be triggered from the central tenant. That means that you start the harvest in central tenant and the harvest continue through all member tenants, but is honoring each library OAPMH settings, supports all the metadata types that are supported by OAPMH, and harvest completes once all libraries inventory is harvested. The other type of harvest is the member tenant harvest. That harvest supports only inventory from the tenant. This functionality was introduced in POCI release actually, so it has been around for a while. Thank you. That's it for all.
So thank you, Magda. Thanks for mentioning that. What we've looked at so far, again, just to remind folks, is essentially what is available in the existing Q release. Some of this stuff was implemented for POPI, so there are institutions running some of this functionality with POPI. But as far as talking about what can it do today, some of that included Quiznalia functionality as well. So now we're going to transition into talking a little bit about what will it do tomorrow. What are the things that are coming for the Ramson's release and beyond, eventually it'll be beyond, in these different areas. And first we'll look at administration and authorization. So what we're talking about here is managing permission sets and managing roles. There was functionality, I don't have a screenshot here. There was functionality added for managing permission sets in the consortia manager. And if some of you have attended some of the Eureka sessions that have happened in the last day, you might recognize this terminology, roles and policies. This is work that's being done during Ramson's to also allow for the managing of roles now, roles and policies from the consortium manager. So similar to the idea of a shared instance, a shared record, you can create a shared role or a shared permission set, if you're talking about OCOPI version, And those, what in this case would be your role, is essentially centrally managed. So you can create roles here in the consortia manager that can only be managed, can only be edited via the consortia manager, but they appear in all of the underlying tenants. So I know there's a lot of terminology coming at you, but think of this as the ability to create a role in the central tenant that will appear in all of the underlying tenants, but not be editable there. So the idea of this gives administrators the ability to manage roles centrally. And of course, you can have a combination. So some of the roles can be centrally managed roles, and then the underlying tenants could create their own roles alongside of that as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, you were saying that for ransoms, shared permission sets will also be supported?
So in Poppy already, there's permission sets, yeah, under the users area, which we don't see in this screenshot. There's a permission sets tab, yeah, where you can manage permission sets. Now we're going to look at some of the inventory stuff. Yeah. Yes, ownership.
Right. So these next couple of slides, I'm going to go over some work being done in ransoms. In inventory again here, specifically around this new action of update ownership, which will be available for both holdings and items. So the idea is that we could take holdings from one affiliation and move it to another. This is functionality that's only available for those shared instances that I went over in the previous slides. So if you have an instance that is shared, available across the consortia, and there are holdings attached to it, that depending on permission you have available, you'll see this new action for update ownership when you're built into the detailed holdings view. So in this animation here, we're showing clicking the action, clicking update ownership, and then you get this mobile here where you can choose where you want this holdings to be moved to. So you'll get a drop down that you can choose on the mobile what affiliation you want to move to. That's dependent on the affiliations that the user is connected to. In this example, we're currently in university, but we also have affiliation to college. So that's what you see on the drop down. And then you get a list of locations available at that affiliation. And yeah, I want to move this. So quick note, as you see here, if there's any linked items on a holding, those linked items will be moved alongside with it. So that's just something to keep in mind. Go to the next slide. Very similar functionality being implemented this time for items. Again, same idea. It needs to be linked to a shared instance in order to have the functionality and then necessary permissions at the user level. Same deal, if you drill into the detailed item view and click the actions drop down, you'll then see the new update ownership action. You get a simpler modal initially, where you get to choose what affiliation you want to move to, and then pick from existing holdings that are available. If there aren't any existing holdings at the affiliation you want to move to, you'll add this little hyperlink here for create new holdings, and that will give you an opportunity to create brand new holdings where you can choose the location to direct them to. And I think that's it for this slide. I think we can move on to
Circulation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Buck. I'm one of the product owners for Circulation. And today I'm going to talk to you about how boring the user perspective is for requesting, because we want it to look exactly like it does now for single tenants. But I do want to let everyone know that this functionality won't be available until Sunflower. While it is boring from the user perspective, the back end is definitely not. So it's taking a little time. Next slide. So ECS requesting will allow for our multi-tenant environments to circulate, loan, and request materials at title and item level requesting. And your multiple tenants can be collections, institutions, libraries, reading rooms. Next slide. So we want to make sure that everything looks and feels like a single tenant folio environment. So you can see we've got our circulation settings in the normal spot, but there is a new setting to enable consortium title level requests. If you want consortium title level requests to work, that needs to be enabled in your central tenant, but also your data tenants or your member tenants need to enable title level requesting on their end as well, so that everything is communicating together. You can see here the request form. It's almost exactly the same. So you can work with your title level information, your item level information, or we've got our requester lookups. We're still doing work on request types and pickup service locations, so that might look a little bit different. But for the most part, it's going to be as similar to our already existing requests form that we already have. So again, the requests app, we've got our center pane where you pull up your requests to work with, you search and filter. That's what I meant to say. Under your request types, statuses, request levels. You might pick up on some new request statuses here, but Anne will speak about those a little bit later. But we've got our usual functionality, and depending on where you are in the system, if you're in your central tenant and you're sharing everything, you're going to see everything. Next slide. So this is as technical as I'm going to get. There are, as Dennis mentioned, other technical conversations and sessions happening this week. So we are making this work with some new modules. We've got mod TLR and mod DCB and mod search. So those are the backend modules that work together to pull together all of the title and instance level information from across your data tenants into the central tenant where most users will be doing their work. It's a ring down logic, so we look to find what's available, see where the items are. We look at the statuses. At the data tenant level, your circulation rules are checked, so we're looking against patrons and locations. That was the other part. To make sure that everything that is being requested is able to be circulated or borrowed or used by the patron that it's being requested for. Mod TLR is going to sort all of the information it receives about instances and items. It's going to look for the number of available items first. Then it's going to look for items that are checked out or in transit, and last, the total number of items. So it's working to find the most likely item that is available to fulfill that title level request for that specific user. And mod DCB, we're using that a little bit to help with this cross-tenant circulation. Next slide. And item level requesting is just as boring, more ring down logic. We're working with mod search again. It's pulling item information. We're working with the circulation rules again, and mod TLR will work to place this request until it succeeds with the right patron and an available item. And that's it. Our requests are placed. They can be circulated, returned, transferred, whether it's offsite or onsite. We're trying to keep it as simple from the user perspective as possible. So this functionality will be coming in Sunflower. I think that's it for me.
Hey, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Ekblad. I work alongside Stephanie Buck and Thomas Trutt in the Vega team, working on circulation. So what I'd like to do today is talk about a couple more key features that we're working on in order to facilitate more and greater types of ECS requesting. We can also anticipate that at least the particular feature that's on the top, this mediated request part 1 base app, will be released in Sunflower. We do plan on implementing both of these key features, which are UX Prod 4657 mediated request part 1 base app home, and UX Prod 4119 private requests or congressional loans for the Library of Congress in the R release. So what I would like for us to do today as I go through my slides is keep in mind that some of this functionality will be applicable to most in this room, actually, because we do anticipate making some adjustments to this mediated request part 1 base app that I'll describe to not only accommodate other ECS interested libraries, but also in the future having the ability to add this mediated request app to single tenant environments of Folio as well. And then there may be applications for this secure tenant that I'll describe too. So I'm just going to first say that because Eureka is coming along, I am starting to convert my use of the word app, which I would have traditionally referred to as like the users app or the request app, or in this case, the mediated request app, to UI. So you may hear me go back and forth because I'm having a hard time always deciding what to call it. So I'd firstly like to touch on this mediated request UI or mediated request app. This will be a new addition to the Folio suite of apps that's available to first ECS environments starting in Sunflower after we hopefully receive council approval. What it will serve to do will be to enable the logic associated with securing, reviewing, and approving specific types of requests with minimal impact to the standard circulation workflows. We do anticipate that the mediated request app, which we could also think of this request app functioning to facilitate parts of special collections requesting or other very specific user requests. We are creating this app in order to function well with the current Folio requests app or UI. This mediated request app will also, from the start, facilitating the ability to view, create, edit, decline, and confirm these specific types of requests, which we'll see in a minute through some screenshots of what this really means. We are going to add some user-friendly mediated request statuses. These request statuses, there are a few that will be in addition to those that are currently in the requests app statuses, but they will work in conjunction with those in the current Folio requests app. This app will also facilitate points of, on the library side, some physical mediation that occurs with specific types of requests. And this, currently we're building it to accommodate what we consider to be a baseline or foundation set of mediated activities that we anticipate libraries needing to use to facilitate, we could say, special collections, mediated requests, or in the case of Library of Congress, congressional requesting and lending, so from congressional patrons. So these activities are confirm item arrival and send item in transit. Confirm item arrival in the mediated requests app will simply be an indicator that an item has been retrieved from the shelf. It has been taken to an authorized staff member who can work to, facilitate it moving forward in the requesting process. And they're just simply scanning it they're saying, okay, yes, we've received this back into this mediated request app. And then send item in transit is, they've maybe taken some steps to review the quality of the piece. Let's say we have a special collections requester who has requested a specific map. And the staff member needs to ensure that this map is of high enough quality to lend or to facilitate the circulation up to this particular customer. And then as I have mentioned already, this particular app, the mediated request app or mediated request UI, connects to the request UI. And so there will be an assurance of of data flow between these two apps. And in the case of the Library of Congress, the requests UI is important. So the current requests UI within FOLIO will play a key part in this congressional requesting and lending process, because those who have access to the mediated request app are a particular subgroup. They are in a particular subgroup of authorized congressional loan staff members at the Library of Congress. And so they will have very secure permissions in order to use this mediated request app. But once they have created the circulation request in association with this special request, there will be staff members who are unauthorized to see patron data who can use FOLIO's current request app in order to facilitate some parts of this request. This will get clearer, I promise, in my next slide. Just a brief note, and I think we may be able to think of ways to use this, even though those of us in the room are not the Library of Congress. There will be a secure tenant that the Library of Congress will begin to use in this ECS environment. This secure tenant, it will be highly permissioned. Only certain staff members at the Library of Congress will be able to use this particular tenant. It will have most of the apps or UIs that are needed in order for this special group of circulation staff members at the Library of Congress to actually see private user data. So for example, a congressional staff member really needs a material on XYZ topic. Only a small group of individuals working at the Library of Congress can actually know who is requesting this material. So their secure data, their private user patron data, will be contained in this secure tenant. And then we are able to facilitate the obfuscation of user data so that individuals working in the circulation apps in the central tenant will be able to go to the shelf, pull the material from the shelf, and not see that Senator Elizabeth Warren has requested this particular item. So I'd like to go to the next slide and give a basic life cycle of a mediated request in order to kind of bring this back to reality here. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, this work will be released in Ramson's for the Library of Congress, but we are anticipating as quickly as possible in Sunflower releasing this app or UI into the greater FOLIO community who is using this ECS model. And so as I'm mentioning these steps in the workflow, I think it's important for us to understand how this could be applicable in other environments. And the definite use case so far is special collections requesting and lending. So basic life cycle of a mediated request, there will be the creation of a new mediated request. And we'll see in a minute through some screenshots that the mediated request creation can occur either in FOLIO itself, so a library staff member can create a new mediated request, or FOLIO can receive from an OPAC a mediated request. The facilitation of the the facilitation of an OPAC created mediated request is also something that we are working on at this point too. As you can imagine, it is complex because at this point we have an entire group of patrons who their requests coming into FOLIO now need to come into the mediated requests app instead of the traditional FOLIO requests app. And so that's also something that we'll be able to handle in the future as well. So there is this creation of the new mediated request. There is also the ability to edit a mediated request before it is confirmed into the request UI. There is also the ability to decline it. It is created, it is confirmed, and then in step 2, the request is reviewed and confirmed by the mediated requests app or UI, and then it is received in step 3 by the request UI. So let's say that we have a staff user in FOLIO, goes into the mediated requests UI, creates this mediated request. Before that, we could even say it's a bit of a pre-request. They confirm it, and there will be an iteration of this request that sits in the requests UI. And then we, in this case, for the first iteration in Ramson's, we have the congressional loan staff, then we'll receive material back after the material has been retrieved by staff using the request UI. In step 4, congressional loan staff receives material, reviews it using those mediated request activities, and then the material will be ready to check out and be delivered to the patron. Before I move on to show some of the statuses and then also a few screenshots, are there any questions related to this? So, okay. Just to be as succinct as possible, this new app coordinates with the already existing requests app in FOLIO in order to just put into place a few additional points of mediation for these special requests. Okay, so as I mentioned, and these slides will be uploaded to the WOLFcon presentation schedule. So feel free to take a look at them at your leisure. But as I mentioned, there are newly created mediated request statuses that will work in conjunction with current request statuses in FOLIO. Some of those are just an indicator, a visual indicator to staff users that they can see that in the mediated requests app, for example, the material has actually been moved back into the mediated request app for approval. We can see here the activities are used in order to confirm that items have arrived, and then also in transit to be checked out. And we can also see through the errors, there's quite a bit of coordination between the mediated requests UI and the current FOLIO UI. I would like to point out, and this is something that we will continue to advance in time. In FOLIO's current request UI, we have the status combined. So the first part of the status will say something like open or closed. And the second part of the status after the hyphen will indicate not yet filled or in transit, etc., closed, filled. We are implementing at the back end to begin with, the ability to separate a status in the mediated requests UI from a workflow step. We're still working out the language of some of that, and there will not be a visual change probably for a couple of releases that users will see using this app. But what this is doing is this separation is allowing us to take into account that there may be additional workflows related to mediated requests that we are not accounting for at this point. So we know that we have some basic workflows that we could understand that libraries are going to use as it relates to this type of special requesting, but we want to be mindful of the fact that we might not know of a step that someone has at this point. I do want to say that I'd like to kind of take what I said just now with a bit of a grain of salt, because I don't know that we really want to be in the business of opening up ourselves to a lot of variation in these mediated request workflow steps. But I do want to just point out that we're moving in that direction. And I realize I'm talking a little while here, but I did have permission from my colleagues to go on a little bit longer. So I have some screenshots of what the environment will look like. Please keep in mind as I'm sharing these that there are still changes being made as we're working through this functionality. We are working as hard as we can to get this up and running and look forward to having it available as soon as possible for y'all. So we can see, as I've mentioned, the mediated request app will be new. And next slide. And this slide is really just the homepage or landing page of the mediated request app. We tried as hard as possible to have this new application look as similar to the current request app as possible in Folio. We will note here that there are activities in a drop down. These are the activities that I mentioned, baseline activities that will be seen. And we also see these mediated request statuses that will be available. And the next slide. So this is an example of the new mediated request form. The new mediated request form should function as similarly as possible to the current request form, except for you're creating them within the mediated request. They have their own statuses, and there is this ability to save and close, which enables the mediated request to hang out in this status of new awaiting confirmation. And that at the point that a new request is in new awaiting confirmation, it's either been saved or closed, or it has been ingested by an OPAC, because each of the requests coming in for new mediated, that are new mediated requests that are coming in from the OPAC need to be reviewed by authorized library staff before confirming that the requester can have this material, et cetera. So this save and close would enable or will enable the user to continue to edit the form later. Confirm will actually create the mediated request. It will be open at that point, and then also an iteration of that request will be seen in Folio's current request UI. Next slide, please. So this is an example of some of the mediated request details. This particular request that is here is in new awaiting confirmation. And so we can see it looks very similar to the request UI with a couple of exceptions. We can see here that because the status is new awaiting confirmation, the authorized user would be able to come in and click edit and confirm. They can further edit the title or item information. They can also edit the requester information, and they can edit information as it relates to the request type. So that's something to keep in mind, that these requests can be edited completely before confirming them. And then next slide. And then this particular slide just expresses the mediated request activities. Again, these mediated request activities cooperate with the request that has already been pushed to the request UI. And I think that might be it, maybe. Yeah, okay, so that was a whirlwind tour of the mediated requests app, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I do want to point out that, I would really encourage the community to take a look at the features that are listed at the beginning of the slides as it relates to this work. And then also we are working on enhancements in Sunflower that go beyond just seeking council approval for the mediated request UI. And so we're looking forward to facilitating patron notices, staff notices from this particular app as well. If there are any questions, please feel free to contact me. Also feel free to contact Steph. And Thomas Trutt is working with us as well. We look forward to talking to the community about how this particular body of work can be scaled. And so thank you so much for your time. Were there any questions that came up during that second portion of the presentation? Yes.
Basically, you're creating mediated requesting and direct consortial borrowing, and it sounds like you're recreating wheels of reshared OpenRS.
Yeah, that's actually that's a good point. So the way that I would the way that I would think about it, or the way that I have been thinking about it, is the type of circulation that Steph and I are talking about today, specifically the type of circulation that Steph is speaking about, is for folio only ECS environments. So we understand that Mobius and other consortia that have adopted an ECS model also use a third-party tool. So we have a whole suite of libraries where we can see would be interested in using an ECS-like model, the first of which is Library of Congress, but others would be interested as well, who are interested in a folio-only multi-tenant environment. And so what we've needed to do in order to facilitate that is we needed to recognize within circulation that we did not have an opportunity to use a third-party tool to facilitate cross-tenant circulation, but we did have modules that are being used by the third-party tools, specifically mod DCB. And so this type of requesting that Steph introduced today is working with what we already have as a module within Folio and then building on that so that a library system or multiple library systems could come to us and say, we only have Folio libraries. We are really interested in an ECS environment. What do you have to give us? So this is what we're doing for that. With the concept of mediated requests and considering whether or not mediated requests might be too similar or reinvention of the current requests app, I see where I could have seen where I do see where you're coming from, actually. And we were thinking that as well. Originally, is there a way that we could use the request app currently? The answer to that we came down to was no, because we did not think that it was important to spend a lot of time and effort adding to the current requests app. And we also know that we have a lot of community members who do not need or would not want a whole suite of tools available to them within Folio that will facilitate points of mediation with a request. And so that's where we settled on the new app. Yeah, sure. If there are any other questions, please feel free to contact us. I'm super happy to talk through the work. I realize that's a lot all at once. So thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Magda Zahaska. Product owner for Bucketed. I'm sorry, I'm losing focus. So what we have done with bulk edit for ECS architecture, we are going to support all available bulk edit functionality, but the access to that functionality will depend on the user affiliation and assigned permissions. Next slide, please. Here is a short demonstration on the behavior of bulk edit on the central tenant. In the example that we will show shortly, the user is logged in the central tenant, has permission to edit records from two different college and university tenants, and will be updating items, records from those tenants. Let's go start. So what is happening right now, we are submitting the list of identifiers that contains barcodes of the records stored in both tenants. Once the preview populates, you can see the barcodes, 2 from university, 3 from the college. Starting bulk edit, and we will change this item status, and we will suppress it from Discovery. We will change status to missing. I don't know if you can see it. suppressing from discovery. This is the preview before the data is committed to the database. User has a chance to review all the changes. So we see that is suppressed from discovery status is missing, and now the data is being saved. So this is the behavior on the central tenant. Now we are switching to member tenant. Please don't start yet. So in here, we are on the member tenant, and I think we are on college. We are going to submit the same list of identifiers. The user has the same permission, but it's on the member tenant. On member tenant, we are not going to support cross-tenant edits. This cross-tenant edits are supported only in single tenant. Thank you. So this is the same file.
Yeah, it's going.
Okay, so we are submitting the list of identifiers from both tenants. We have queries because those results are from another tenant and they are reported as not found. And the rest of the bucket is exactly the same for those 3 remaining records. And we will do the same, we will change the status and unsuppress the records. So once this is running, are there any questions related to ORCADET in ECS environment?
We'll have some time at the end too, if that's.
Okay.
So.
So I'm not going to introduce myself again. This is data export in ECS environment. The issue here is similar. We are exporting records from the central tenant, and we are exporting instances that are shared, and you can export them also in prior releases from central tenant. What we are introducing in ransom, well, if the user has required affiliations and permission, the user will be able to export also export instances enriched with items and holdings data that comes from the member tenant. So I have also, not yet.
I can pause. You good?
So what I'm going to show here, okay, so.
Yeah, it's fine.
And so I'm going to show here in data export, you have 2 types of export profiles. Defaults, the default profiles for authority records and bibliographic records that export the entire MARC record as it is. But for bibliographic records, you have also an option of building a custom export profile that will allow you to include additional fields from holdings and items records. So in this example, we are going to build or use custom mapping profile. Thank you. So we are navigating to settings, data export. We are going to use post. We are going to use the custom mapping profile that gets the entire MARC record, MARC bibliographic record, and adds some things from holdings. In this example, we are going to add holdings and client information, holdings HR ID and ID, unique identifier of the holdings records, plus item, barcode, item, HR ID, and item, unique identifier. So in data export app, we are selecting submitted the list of identifiers. Identifiers are for instances, starting the data export. And we are exporting records from university and special tenants. The export completed successfully. I just want to demonstrate the mark record that was generated in the process. And I really don't see that at the end, but take my word. Those fields are attached for all records, and the slides will be shared later, so you can review them. So I think that's it.
Yeah.
And I'm done for today.
How's everybody holding up? One more thing. No, two more things. Well, a few more things. Okay. So acquisitions. We're also making some interesting enhancements in acquisitions to essentially allow a system to make the orders app in the central tenant aware. And how that plays out is basically very simple change in the orders application within the locations accordion of a purchase order line to allow a user to identify an affiliation. So the orders application will be able to order material on behalf of any of the data tenants within the system. So the central tenant, you can, in the central tenant, create a purchase order with purchase order lines that will essentially be ordering material to locations in any of the underlying tenants. And the way that you do that is just by selecting the affiliation when you're creating a purchase order line and choosing a location from within that specified tenant. Here again, the user's affiliations are important. A user cannot create a purchase order line with affiliations or on behalf of tenants that they are not affiliated with. So you have to, your user must have the affiliation to be able to select it, and therefore you must have the affiliation to be able to select a location from that underlying tenant. So you can create users that can order for certain, order on behalf of certain members or certain tenants, and not others. Probably also worth mentioning here that the orders application, as part of these updates, is now able to create, through that inventory interaction, to create the holdings and items in the identified, for the identified location in the appropriate tenant. So an order that exists centrally can be related to holdings and items within underlying tenants. Now you might be wondering, how would you receive those things? And I also should mention that this is something that needs to be enabled, even in an ECS enabled environment, and it's only applicable to an ECS enabled environment. So you would have to turn on central ordering if it's something that if it's a feature that you want to use. And if you don't turn on central ordering, you just won't see that affiliation drop down in the purchase order line. And then in receiving, in the settings for each individual tenant, you also have some configuration options if this central ordering is enabled. Because essentially within a member tenant, if your active affiliation is set to one of the member tenants, you can either receive material that's associated with central orders, or you can receive material that is associated with local orders. So at this time, we're not mixing those two things together. There is effectively a segmented control that appears at the top on the left-hand side that would say the name of the central tenant or the name of the local tenant, your active affiliation at the time. And you can configure whether that option appears or whether it always looks at the central order data or it always looks at the local order data. So that's in settings. So what that essentially allows a user to do, a user that is only affiliated with a member tenant can still receive material that was centrally ordered. That kind of makes sense. And now we're going to talk a little bit about reporting.
All right. Thanks, Dennis. I am Kathleen Moore, product owner for the List app. So for anyone who's not familiar with the List app, here's sort of a quick screenshot of what it does overall. It's an app that exists that allows you to create a list of records that is a persistent list that you can then export to CSV. And this was initially released in the Poppy release in its beta form, and we have been updating it in each subsequent release. In ECS, it is currently available in any member tenant, but any of the records within it are based on the records in that member tenant. What we are adding for the Ramson's release is the ability from the central tenant to be able to create lists of certain record types that contain data from the underlying tenants. That again, you can still do all of the same current list functionality so that you can update your list, refresh it. You can also export those contents to CSV. Go to the next slide. So when you're in the context of the central tenant, you are able to create a lists. So the first four types of records are only going to be local queries. So loans, organizations, purchase order lines, or users. Those do not support cross-tenant query or records from other tenants at this time. However, instances, holdings, and items, we are going to support cross-tenant query. However, that is dependent on the user's affiliations and permissions. So if we have a user that only has access to the central tenant, when they create a list of instances, it can only contain instances from the central tenant. If we have a user who has affiliations to the central tenant, plus two member tenants, but not the others, then they can only see instances from central and the two that they have affiliations for. So the records that you can see are specific to the affiliations that you have. And so the video that's playing here is showing an example of some of the new fields that we have added as part of Ramson's. So you're able to query on an instance record on whether it is shared or local. And so when you're doing it in the context of the central tenant, you're going to see all of your shared records. And then here it just changed the query to do local records. And it's adding a parameter right now to choose, I'm looking for records that have a tenant ID of both college and university. And so when this query runs, I'm going to see records. This list of instances would have records in both college or university. Or I could modify it and say, I only want records that are in the university tenant. So you have the flexibility there to determine what of your available tenants that you want to see records for. And so while that's showing instance records, the same functionality has been added for holdings and items records. When you're in the context of a member tenant, anything that you do in the list app is specific to that member tenant. So you are not able to query data from another member tenant. You are able to do any local records. So again, all of the currently supported record types in the list app. So loans, organizations, purchase order lines, users, instances, holdings, and items. A small caveat to that, if an instance is shared from the central tenant, you will be able to see it from a member tenant. So that's the only minor thing there, so that you still will be able to see those shared instances while you're in a member tenant, but you won't be able to see any other records. And the sort of the loop that's playing here is showing how that when you create a query and you're looking for shared records and you test that, it's going to show these lists of records that are coming from the consortium, which happens to be the name of the central tenant in this environment. When we changed it to search for only local records, and then we're choosing the tenant ID here, it's moving a little bit faster, but you'll see the only two options were the tenant that we are in and the central tenant. And that was again because it's 4 instances that you could see those 2 tenants. But otherwise, all of your records are local. And again, we maintain the same functionality within that list. That's it.
Yeah. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information, hopefully interesting information. And I wanted to kind of summarize this, just to kind of get conversations going, to talk a little bit about why this is exciting or interesting for Folio, why this set of functionality I think is really, really exciting to see coming together. And you've probably gathered from the beginning of this, seeing the evolution from Poppy to where we're at now, that initially this set of features was really, the features we were developing were very specific to consortia specifically. And over the last year or so, our understanding of what systems may be interested in this functionality is maybe even broader than that. And even within the realm of consortium, there is so much variation. So we're kind of thinking, and it's why the name of this is kind of getting maybe a little bit problematic, but for ECS, there really are, as of this Sunflower release, which you might consider the kind of phase 2 of features being delivered for ECS, you could probably think of this in the context of 3 different models to really oversimplify things. And the first one, obviously, is the library consortium, or maybe the centralized consortium. This diagram is trying to kind of summarize what's really happening here. There are some specific modules in the central tenant that make it important. And the central tenant is through these modules, allowing functionality to take place between all of the tenants in the system. In the consortial model, there could be some central ordering, some local ordering. It could be, no central ordering, all local. You could be sharing instances, all these different things that you may be doing in the consortium model. And that is what makes ECS, sort of an enhancement on existing Folio features. The national library model is maybe the second model that we would see as the Library of Congress implementation is kind of coming together. In this model, it's still very similar in that there is a central tenant. You might call it a different thing, but it's still these 2 modules here that make the central tenant unique. But the idea of, how these other tenants are being used is obviously a little bit different. Maybe some of them are very specialized workflows, like was described for congressional loans. And having separate tenants for that can facilitate some really interesting functionality in those ways. But at the end of the day, you're just creating users and you're affiliating them with the tenants you want to affiliate them with and giving them the permissions there that you want to give them. So you could think of these different tenants as members, or maybe as kind of work groups within a library that perform a specific function. And there might even be separate tenants that are not registered with the central tenant in a system like this. So you may have a cluster where some of it is a ECS-enabled system and some of the tenants are independent. So that's maybe the national library model. And then the last one that potentially you might think of this functionality suiting in certain scenarios would be what you might describe as like a complex library, where there are either different physical locations that have different regulations or something along those lines. You have a main library, law library, medical library, similar idea. If you want to learn more, I think a number of people have mentioned there is now a fair amount of documentation available through the wiki. There are more kind of technical documentation being collected under the consortia SIG in the wiki. They're under this ECS documentation page in the consortia SIG area of the wiki. In Jira, obviously, you can see a lot of these features. And, if you're interested, feel free, like any other area of Folio, please make comments on the functionality you find in Jira, or make comments in the wiki, or reach out to any of the folks that you've seen presenting today. And we have maybe a few minutes for questions, if there's still some questions. maybe we've completely exhausted everyone's.
I just had a basic question, maybe it's too basic, but, when you have a shared instance, can that be shared from the tenant? It can be shared from the tenant to the central tenant to the member tenants, but it can be shared the other way?
Yeah,
Can it be shared back?
that's a very good question. So if you create if you create the instance locally, there is a mechanism for sharing it with the rest of the consortium, which
And that sort of just sits in the central.
essentially shares it up to the central tenant. Yeah, you can think of it that way. Yeah.
If you did that, can you still lock permission for say entities
So
to the?
yeah, that's a really interesting question as well. You're essentially handing over the governance of that record to the central tenant. So your user from that point you would need to have permission to edit central instances to be able to edit that thing. Yeah.
So could this be undone, the sharing? So basically someone clicks accidentally on share and.
Yeah.
Or is it locked then and they lose access to editing?
Yeah, currently you can't unshare, right?
Yeah.
So there is a confirmation though, I believe. So the person would have to, oops, I clicked it, and then say, yes, no, I meant to, oops, I clicked it, and then say, oh, right, wait a minute. No, didn't want to do that. But yeah, sure. Yeah.
Oh, great job, guys. If I want to test this, but is there a snapshot environment for ECS?
Yeah, there's actually a bug fest. There was a Q bug fest environment for ECS, like an ECS enabled Q bug fest environment. So there is a bug fest page if you're interested in signing up for the upcoming bug fest, or if you want just to access the previous bug fest environment that's ECS enabled, you can definitely do that. There are other environments as well, but that one might be the best one to look at.
Except if you want to test circulation, because that's on a separate branch. So if you are interested in testing some of the new circulation functionality, please reach out to Anne or Thomas Trutt or myself. We are doing a lot of user acceptance testing,
Yep.
and it's open to everyone. So please, we want your feedback.
So we have the single pane for logging in. How does this work with the split model, with the shared other tenant? There should be no connection. And how much of the user data is shared between the ECS instances?
So, okay, so if you have a tenant that's not registered, then it would have its own UI and a separate login. Otherwise, everyone's logging in through that. The way that the users work is your user has a primary affiliation. So wherever you create the user, so let's say we create the user in tenant A, that the user's created there, that becomes my primary affiliation. If you affiliate that user with another tenant, what we call a shadow user is essentially created in the user application of that other tenant. So
there is knowledge on all tenants of which tenants are on the other, of which users on the other tenants, because you need to prevent creating double users, don't you?
there is a shadow record of that user. Wherever
before creating, basically I create a user on subtenant A, and now someone on subtenant B tries to create the same user.
you would essentially have to have a unique user ID. So if you were,
Yeah.
You will then, but users are identified by logins usually. So
Users are differently identified.
the user object, but if you log into the form, you will put in your login. So either you have to do a split, have to prevent using duplicate logins, or you could have a user with one login and one password and one subtenant and one login and the other, and the same login and another password at the other subtenant. If
Yeah,
you're not doing it by an external provisioning system.
you aren't, I think Joe has an answer for this, yeah.
Yeah, so basically what happens is when you, there are more steps that when you're creating a user. So in an ECS environment, a staff type user that is going to be granted permissions and affiliations needs to be designated as a staff type user. When that happens, then a shadow of that user is created in the central tenant, but that shadow user simply locks the username so that it cannot be replicated on any other tenant. But the username can actually be a full email address. So instead of saying, you know, from J Reimers, it could be jreimers@epsco.com, and that will log us out. But in terms of PII, that does not get shared. So if I'm associating a user, like if I have a user I want associated with multiple tenants, I would have to recreate that PII on each individual tenant that I want to. Because we need to keep that isolated, because there is our information there. That does not get shared. All that gets shared is credential login specific information. Does that clarify that as well?
Yeah, so technically that could possibly by some arguments still be a GDPR problem with using emails for the login. Because email, a full email with a full name is a PII, but for some people count as PII because it's a full name. So if you do this and share the same login, the other instances would be able to look up at the central tenant if there's a user with the same email address, which might be a leak of data. It might be.
But at that point, isn't that more of a library policy decision?
It's
Are they gonna allow that or not?
It's GDPR. It's not only policy. If it's technically a problem, then we might have a GDPR problem.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, would use of secure tenants, that she mentioned, be a solution to the problem?
You could choose to not use multiple affiliations, like you could, if you want to manage it by creating specific users in each tenant for a person, you could do that. Rather than take advantage of the affiliations,
No,
but
the problem is the other way around. The problem is not creating a user with multiple affiliations, but the possibility of using the central login exposes
I see what you mean.
lookup feature.
The
library affiliation, that's only one.
yeah, they are, yeah, they're authenticated.
It depends if you use company email addresses or not, basically.
You don't even have to use email.
Yeah,
I was just
but-
using
but-
that as an example. You could have like,
Yeah.
you know, GDB dash username. Which could be whatever random character, I mean, however you want to set it up. That's just a matter of local policy. So there are ways to avoid GDPR violations with anonymization. And that's just a policy matter. The only thing that we care about is that in an ECS labeled environment within registered tenants, you cannot have a duplicate username.